Going, yeah, it's on. Okay, healing at the pool, John 5. And I think we did the first verse, but I put it up here again. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. And the great question of the day, after this was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Beyond the place, after these, there was festival of the Judeans, those belonging to Judah, and he went up, Jesus, to or into Jerusalem. And this is interesting because we had that little question, about up and down. And, Cana is really kind of hilly. Going to Cana would be hilly-ish. So up or down, what? But Jerusalem is really up a hill because it's up in the hills. It's up in the mountains-ish. But, you think about Jewish guys, they really are about Greeks, right? The Greeks are going to be really concrete. So they literally probably meant up and about Canaan, I don't know, down to Canaan, whatever. But if you notice, that was really funny because they used a verb about down to. It was keta something, which is a composite verb. In this case, there's a preposition. And it's a preposition we haven't seen very much in the Gospels, which is, I don't know, I think that's kind of fun. We're going to see, when we get to the woman caught in adultery, we're going to look at words a lot. Because we look at words anyway, right? But what's really unique and interesting, I'll give you a preempt about this, is like the 8th chapter. But what's really interesting about that whole sequence is the words are not the words we're used to. Right? So it's like you're reading a text and you're reading a certain, kind of style, and then all of a sudden you get Stephen King. You know what I'm saying? You're reading Charles Dickens and suddenly get Stephen King, and you go, wow, there's something wrong with this passage, right? And everybody who reads it should be able to go, there's something wrong with the passage. However, when you translate it, right, you translate the words into the common words we're used to hearing in the scriptures, and then all of a sudden it becomes the same. But I think we'll be able to see the differences, and that's really cool to me. So it's fun to see different and new words in the Greek, but it's also interesting, and we see words even in John that are different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke, even though Matthew, Mark, and Luke are not synoptics. And if you look at the word usage, it's really different. So hey, the translation. After these, that is these events, and remember I told you, we arbitrarily break it. It's an arbitrary break, but that's okay. Remember, these are logos to tell us. After these, there was a festival of the Judeans, and Jesus went up into Jerusalem. So this is a question I said, I got to answer this for you because I want the answer too. Which feast or festival? Okay, let's evaluate a little bit. I've got 3 different sources with basically 3 different answers, kind of ish. So here's one. Chapter opens, Jesus goes again to Jerusalem for a feast because the Gospel records Jesus visited Jerusalem for the Passover in John 2:13. And another passage is mentioned in John 6:4. Some commentators have speculated whether John 5:1 is also a Passover, implying the events of John 2-6 took place over at least 3 years, or whether a different feast is indicated. According to Deuteronomy, 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord. So this will help us, right? Your God in a place which he chooses, the Jerusalem festival. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot or Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Bingles Noman, which, by the way, he's a Lutheran dude, lists a number of authorities for the preposition the feast referred to as Pentecost. The pulpit commentary notes, so we already have some interesting stuff here, right? The pulpit commentary notes that the indefinite Greek ephrathah has been identified by commentators with every feast in the calendar. Theorta, this is the word for feast, theorta. So there can be no final settlement of the problem. In verse 9, there's a Sabbath, right? There's a Sabbath in verse 9 of this account. There are 3 holidays that include obligation to go up to Jerusalem. Obligation to go to Jerusalem. Passover, weeks, and tabernacles. Other holidays holidays such as New Year, Rosh Hashanah, Atonement, Yom Kippur, dedication, do not include this obligation. The obligations in Deuteronomy, oh yeah, you can read that. I'm not a Hebrew guy, but I put it left in there. I thought it was nice. Passover's in the early spring, weeks early summer, tabernacles in the early fall. Assuming the narratives in John 4 through 6 are chronological, assuming that the John 4:35, 4 months more to the harvest. Remember that in the woman at the well? Was set at the time 4 months before the wheat harvest, early summer. Then the festival mentioned in John 5:1 could either be Passover, weeks, or tabernacles. It could also be that 4 months before the harvest refers not to the wheat harvest, but to the general harvest time in the early fall. Therefore, reference to tabernacles, which is called the harvest holiday, and to the preceding 40 days of repentance, the month of Elul, beginning with Tishrei, and the end of the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, just before tabernacles. That's the booth. Then the message in John is clear. He's saying, don't wait for the month of the Elul to start to repent. Repent now. Okay. They're tying back quite logically and correctly in the Logos to tell us. The fact that some witnesses read for the Jewish festival of John 5:1 suggests that the festival was tabernacles, because Tabernacles is the only Jewish festival that is commonly called, or the festival. Remember, I do Greek, not Hebrews. Nehemiah, Babylonian, Talmud. This is really good stuff, right? The tractate Rosh Hashanah. Other holidays are always referred to by their particular tractate, their particular names. So, very logical, reasonable stuff. The next reference to the seasons that we have is John 6:4, near the Passover time. Assuming the events narrated are sequential in the same year, then this would suggest the previous festival with an obligation up to Jerusalem mentioned in John 5:1 was tabernacles. So, there's a good reason to surmise that John 3:5 refers to tabernacles, though we need to make some brave assumptions in the text to do it. These are great assumptions, right? However, there is some more here. This is really interesting. I got another paper that talks about this, and this is a chronological. Remember, we really shouldn't be matching because they're not synoptic. They're Logos to tell us. But in this one, you see the choices, that is the choices of the festivals. So here's choices: Passover, John the Baptist arrested, AD 31, you got John here, Purim. This guy asks, is it Purim? And the reason he asks, is it Purim, is because in AD 32, Purim was on the Shabbat, on Sabbath. And there's a big deal with Sabbath. Now, Purim is not one of the required festivals to go up to Jerusalem. It's one of the more quiet festivals. Purim is the one that celebrates the escape from Babylon with Esther, remember? And they read the book of Esther. So, and it's a summer festival. This is kind of interesting, right? Could it be Purim? And this author is a Jewish Messianic Jew, and basically evaluated it from an astronomical. That is, astronomical being from the calendar, right? When would be the Shabbat? When could this have occurred? So, first reader should see that all the choices for the unnamed feast of John fit within a four-year chronology laid out in Luke 13, 6 through 9. It's the only chronology that fits Daniel 9 and the resurrection Shabbat, with Wednesday crucifixion, John the Baptist's birth narrative show that it was the spring of AD 29. So he's arguing about the year, says it was in 32. The unnamed feast is unnamed because it's a minor feast. This is what he says. He didn't go back to the tractates, which announces the Festival of Booths, as kind of an unnamed feast. But he says because it was unnamed, therefore he concludes it was a minor feast. This is really interesting, right? It can't be Hanukkah because John refers to that feast by its proper name. He does. And later on, 10:22. Further, the time spent between Hanukkah and Passover is too great to explain the timing of the responsa in John 5:17 through 46, just after hearing the news of John's death and subsequent withdrawal to the northeast of Galilee near Passover. The Sabbath healing in John 5 would have been old news by then, and an argument picked over Shabbat, healing, in John 5 would have been old new. Let's see, and the argument picked over something more recent. Throughout his ministry, Yeshua, Messianic Jew, keeps increasing the stakes and making bolder assertions in public about who he is. Thus, the latest controversy of the topic, this leaves the unnamed feast to be Purim in AD 32. Now, locating the date in AD 32, I decided to see if anyone else was saying the same. I discovered Lambert Dolphin, Eugene Falstich, Gordon Franz all accepted this interpretation, except all these sources rely on Falstich's calculation. Chronologically, the only feast that makes sense is Purim in AD 28. The feast of John V, John 5 fell on a Shabbat. The only feast that fall on Shabbat between 25 and 35 was Purim of AD 28. That's what Falstich says. So there's still controversy. We don't know the answer, but it's really neat, right, to dig into this and see what scholars and other people have said. And by the way, the reason there's funny, I don't know why there's funny things in here. Obviously, the text of the paper had some funny fonts that didn't come out even from the internet. So whatever. But this was Falstich, and a lot of the information comes from that. So we got three choices. Was it another Passover? Was it Tabernacles, Booths, or was it Purim? It's funny that the Messianic Jew says it's probably Purim in any case. So let's see. Maybe we can tease something out of the Greek. Maybe not. These guys are really good Greek scholars. Now, there is in Jerusalem near the Sheep Gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethsaida, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Okay. Here's the Greek. King James. Now, there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market, a pool, which is called the Hebrew tongue Bethsaida, having 5 porches. Here's the Greek literal.
Oh, you have lots of fun things.
Oh, I have fun things. Estin, there's that what do you call it, declarative identity form. But into the Jerusalem, honor against to the pertaining to sheep. Probatike. Coli Umberta, a diving or swimming place. Now this is really interesting because we're going to look see whether a diving or swimming place, the logically called, epilogomene, logically called in Hebrew language, Hebriste, or in Aramaic, Bethsaida. And we're going to see also that. 5 colonnades or porticos holding. So here's the translation. Here's the translation of the literal, cultural translation of the literal. But there is in Jerusalem against the sheep gate a diving or swimming place logically called Bethsaida in the Hebrew language or in Aramaic, holding 5 colonnades or porticos. And the reason I mention this, they call it the Hebrew, but we know that Hebrew was a dead language at the time. So Aramaic would have been the language. Of course, this is written in Greek, and this has always been in Greek, never in Aramaic or Hebrew or anything like that. The people didn't commonly speak Hebrew. They would commonly speak Aramaic. But it's interesting, of course, in all of our New Testament documents, they're all Greek, and they have to explain the Aramaic text or Aramaic meanings. It's also interesting that it calls it logically called. Now, we're going to find out why that it says that. But here is a picture of Jerusalem, if I can get it to show. And here it is, the sheep's pools. I'm not sure I like the way, I tried to get a really good picture for you, but this calls it the sheep's pools and not Bethsaida. And then it has Israel's pool. Here's a sheep gate right into the temple. And just from the location, this should make you think. Now, I do like this chart or this map because it does show, I think, a lot of stuff in real, in a good, what do you call it? A good, from what I know historically and what I've researched, this is really a good map. You see the fortress of Antonia? This is where the Romans are. Here's a sheep gate. They're overlooking the temple. That's always important to remember. Okay, so let's see. What does it look like? I think this is a picture of what it looks like today. This is what it looks like today. The architecture, I tried to get it doesn't look much like what we think, right? It's all crowded, whatever, because there are buildings on buildings and buildings. But here is a picture of what it looked like maybe in the time of Christ. Here's the Temple Mount, the Pool of Israel, the Fortress of Antonia. Here is Bethsaida, and there are two pools. Here's the eastern wall, and the colonnades, porches, 5 porches. I don't know, I can't find 5 porches. It looks like there is. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 porches. I don't know, there's a bunch of porches. So I don't know why they say 5 porticos, 5 porches, but whatever. But there's more to this story. Gospel of John records miraculous healing. It took place at the pools of Bethsaida. The names of the pools did not mention elsewhere in the Bible or in Josephus or other histories. The Hebrew word Bethsaida means house of mercy. Bethsaida, house of mercy or house of grace. In Hebrew and Aramaic, it also can mean shame or disgrace. Remember, Hebrew is super euphemistic. So to use this word Bethsaida, you have to know the context. Yes, context. So, very interesting stuff. Here's some information here about architectural. The Gospel of John describes the pools as having 5 porticos. The pool was an extreme depth of 13 meters. 13 meters, so 3 times 13, that's pretty deep. Matter of fact, that's about the same depth as a diving pool over at WSU, the one we use for survival training, because you can't touch the bottom anywhere, ever at all. And don't go down to the bottom, that's bad. The site was discovered in 1888 by Schick. Prior to this, scholars did not think the pools of Bethsaida existed. Isn't that funny? Oh, I got a text that's attributed from the period in times, but it can't be there, right? Oh, and then we find it. Oh, well. The pools are located below the surface. That's why in the architecture, the thing I showed you, the modern era, because it's been built over so many years. This is why the site took so long to discover. The pools were originally associated with healing. The recent archaeologists discovered the pools were also a mikvah. Why would you think you need a mikvah before the sheep's gate into the temple? Because if you don't do the mikvah, you can't eat teruma, right? You can't eat the food, that you can't eat the sacrifice. So yeah, this looks really logical. And if you look at my map or chart I showed you, wow, that's kind of interesting, right? That the other pools, there are no other places where you could really have a mikveh except the pool of Israel. The pool of Israel is not mentioned in any of the Gospels. So that's interesting too. So was that a mikveh? Well, probably not, because when the site was first discovered, the archaeologists only noticed one pool. However, 100 years later, when the pool was more carefully evaluated, archaeologists discovered that there were 2 pools. The pools are separated by a wall, and this is what gives us the 5 covered colonnades. This matches the Gospel of John's description. In other words, they count the 2 long ones. So you have 2 shorts, 2 longs, the middle, another 5. Count them. Okay? The pools are separated by the wall gives us 5 colonnades. This matches the Gospel of John. The lower pool was used as the mikvah, while the upper pool was a reservoir that supplied the lower pool with clean water. Some scholars believe that the upper pool is mentioned in the Old Testament. In the book of Isaiah, it mentions an upper pool. Wow. Okay. Now, these guys would be sitting. All right, would they let them be jumping in the mikvah? Nope. The mikvah would have been more shallow, right? But yet it would be deep enough so a person could be totally immersed. And obviously the Pharisees, are overseeing, Sadducees overseeing, the Pharisees overseeing this thing. But the pool that we're talking about, the upper pool, is the one that is a reservoir. So that's the water ain't moving, and it's probably the source of the water is either from rainwater or, we don't know. There's no indication of where it comes from. But, it has to be rainwater, it has to be groundwater of a certain type, blah, blah, blah. You got all the requirements, right? And then you have the mikvah, which is below it, which you would then fill with the water, right? You would keep it full with the water from the reservoir, which totally is a legal, thing. And actually, you can mix other water in the mikvah itself. So the reservoir, it can hold all the good stuff, right? The rainwater, the pure water, but then you can fill the mikvah. So really interesting. And do you notice, is there some other thing about baptism here maybe kind of fitting? Remember old Nicodemus, a whole thing we had before. So, there's a lot to this. There's a lot in this just to start. And then we get into the big stuff. NIV, here's a great number. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie. The blind, the lame, the paralyzed. That's NIV. Here's the Greek. Here's what the King James says. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. Okay. Here's the Greek, literal. In tauteus, two hishi in it. Kat keto, we're lying down. There's katakito. Kata is down. So lying down, reclined for a meal. Ooh. Okay, reclined for a meal. That automatically implies they are doing what? Laying on their sides. Yeah, sides. Why do you think they're laying on their sides? Well, you could be eating, but if you're laying on your side watching the water, we're going to get to this, right? The water moves, and you need to get in. So if you're lying on your side, you can see the water. If you're laying on your back or you're laying away from it, oh, you missed it. Too bad. One in a lifetime chance, you're done. And that's what we're going to get to here. So they're lying down, a fullness of the who were feeble, opaque, that is blind, tiflon, opaque, blind, colon, deprived of a foot, limping, zeron, of dry, withered, deknomon, they were out from welcoming from the heart, out from welcoming. Of the hydatos of water, a moving. Okay? And these porticos or colonnades were lying down, reclined for a meal, a fullness of those who were feeble, opaque, deprived of a foot, dry. They were out from welcome from the heart, moving of the water. So this is interesting Greek in itself, because remember, Greek is really, Greek is concrete. Greek is totally concrete. There's almost no euphemism to be found in Greek. But this is kind of a euphemistic-ish statement, right? Really cool statement. They were out for a welcoming from the heart, the moving, the agitation of the water. And kinesin, that is similar to the English word, what am I thinking of? Kinetic. Moving, kinetic, agitation. This Greek-English thing goes on too, right? Here in the NIV, and this is a note.
Like I don't have verse 4 in
Yes.
my NIV.
Yes. Because it's in your notes. In the notes. John 5:4 in the NIV says, some manuscripts include here, and this is down in your notes, should be in your notes someplace, wholly apart, paralyzed, and they waited for the moving of the waters. And here's 4. From the time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. The first one into the pool after such a disturbance would be cured of whatever disease they had. Now, remember, I use majority text. The majority text, I got a copy of it right here. If you want to read it, thumb through it, it's in Greek. But the majority text is the text that most scholars have agreed is the completed text. Now, the NIV is what they're saying is there are older texts that do not include this fourth verse. Remember, the verses were added, right? The verses are all added, but you notice the King James has it, which, okay, well, we may get more information here. We do know, well, we do try to keep the ads out, right? But still, this is some really interesting information. King James in 5:4, they have it. For an angel went down in a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first after the troubling of the water stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. Now, what I think is important is John, if you remember, we've talked about this a lot. John is the late gospel, and it's the one where the readers, everybody knew Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They'd heard it in their churches. They were really familiar with it. And John comes along, and what did they ask John? What else, right? And so whether John added this or it was added later, the whole point that someone felt that there needed to be an explanation of why this was a big deal, especially to the readers. Remember, I told you, the readers of this, that is, the hearers, because they read by memorization, it was all memorized. But those who were hearing it were probably mostly Greeks and Romans. And I really think he was really writing to the Greek-speaking Latins. So they needed to know, right? Because they didn't know this stuff. It's kind of like us. And, we know too much about the Holy Land. But if you went to, let's say, Ukraine, right? And you wanted to know about Ukraine, someone would have to explain to you the importance of certain words and certain meanings and certain things. So anywhere you go in the world, if you don't have familiarity with it, right, you need to learn it, especially when it's in a different language. So John, or a follower, someone later may have put this in. It's not in the earlier manuscripts. Or, it could have been lost from the early manuscripts, retained in a later one. Who knows, I'm not going to argue that about the woman caught in adultery. I think that's a total made-up thing. But because it looks that way. And when we evaluate that, we'll see it, because we've got this in, it's who knows where it's supposed to go? Well, it's not anywhere. It's not found in majority text. It's not in, we find it in Luke, I think Luke, Matthew, not in Mark, Luke, Matthew, and John, at different places. So, woohoo, that's a fun ad. Anyway, here's what it says literally in the Greek. Angelos, a messenger. Okay. Angelos means messenger in Greek. I think I misspelled that. Assigning a reason, down, an occasion, carry on, an opportune time, Catabanon came down, descended into the Polyimbertha, a diving or swimming place, and put in motion a tarasa, put in motion to agitate back and forth, shake to and fro, the hydor, the water. The certainly accordingly Protos first stepped in behind, beyond, or after the disturbance, commotion of the hydatos, the water, to make one whole was become, to which what depote even that time, katecheto, he was held down by disease. And what I want to point out is this: we recognize a whole lot of these words. So whoever added this, or if it was added, the person adding it was probably within the time, place, and very high consistency, because we recognize a lot of these words, right? And we've seen them before. Here's what the translation says: assigning a reason, during an opportune time, a messenger came down, descended into the diving or swimming place, and put the water in motion, to agitate back and forth, shake to and fro. Accordingly, the first who stepped into it after the disturbance of the water was become made whole, who even at that time was held down by disease. And this word is interesting, though. Nosmate, this is probably the only place it's found in the New Testament. Because remember, and that could indicate a later ad, because remember, in Greek, disease, it was not really, remember, you went to Asclepion. You went to the Asclepius. You did not, you're not out trafficking. So they would have said, disease, go away, right? They wouldn't even let him there in the portico, in the area. Okay, so one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. 38 years. Here's the Greek, here's the King James. And a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. Was but a certain one or thing, anthropos, a man, ekai, in that place, triakotona, 38 years, he holding into the feebleness of himself. And what's very interesting about this, okay, first of all, yes, in Old English, we used to say 30 and 8, 20 and 8, that kind of thing. And that changed in the modern era. We say 28, 38, whatever. In German, it's always like 21, right? 1 and 20. In Greek, it's always 30 and 8 or 30 and 1. So, yeah, this is probably, that's why the King James is probably a better translation. The NIV makes it a cultural translation to our times. What I'm trying to present is a cultural translation that is closer to the Greek. But a certain man was in that place 38 years, he holding into his feebleness. Feebleness, interesting. Feebleness. Obviously, feebleness, remember at the beginning, told us limping without a foot. Basically, he had a problem, the similar word. And Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time. He asked him, "You want to get well?" I love this. This is kind of like the woman at the well, right? Hey, give me the drink, right? Give me something to drink. Hey, do you want to get well? And let's see what the Greek says. When Jesus saw him lie and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he said to them, "Wilt thou be made whole?" Okay, what does it say in the Greek here? Totan, Idion, having stared at Jesus, the lying down, the reclining the meal, same word, right? And Gnos, having known that or because, much or many, even now, time, pronon, time of the gods, by the way, he has held legai. He makes a logical argument to him. Thelesis, you will or desire, healthy, to cause to be. Here's the translation, cultural translation. Jesus, having stared at him lying down, and having known that much time, even now, he has held, he makes a logical argument to him. You desire to cause to be healthy. Yeah, okay, should be a question mark. But it is a question, You desire to cause to be healthy. Sounds a bit funny to us, but that's direct Greek. Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Not as astute or erudite an answer as the woman at the well, but it's a reasonable answer. I mean, that makes sense. The impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man when the water is troubled to put me into the pool, but while I'm coming, another steppeth down before me. Aprokanthe, he concluded for himself to him the Ashshinon, the enfeebled. Kyriai, supreme in authority. Anthropon, a man faced, no or not, I hold. In order that whenever Terakhthe, it's been stirred or agitated, the hydro, the water, he might throw me to or into the swimming or diving place, in who which what, day but ikromai, I am coming or going, ego, other or another before of me, katabana, we've seen this a lot, comes down to sins. What's interesting about this is really fun too. This pool is 13 meters deep. They calculated it out like 40 feet deep. And he doesn't have anybody to throw him in. I hope he can swim, right?
Probably not.
Probably not, yeah.
38 years people.
38 years feeble, probably can't swim. Most of the people in these societies can't swim. So this looks like a tragedy waiting to happen, right? And how many people get tossed in? I don't think they have lifeguards or anything, but even that's kind of funny to think about, but it's probably happened a lot. Oh. The enfeebled concluded for himself to him. So it's not like he just snapped off, right? He thought about it for a little bit, thought about it. First of all, this is interesting. This guy comes to me and says, hey, do you want to make me healthy? I'm like, okay, what is this? This is like the Nigerian prince email you get, right? It says, you want $1 million? Well, sure, I want $1 million. Well, just send me $100 wrapped in foil, right? And that's the deal, right? Hey, you want to get healthy? Okay, what are you selling, right? So he thought about it. He concluded for himself. The enfeebled concluded for himself to him. Supreme in authority. That in itself is interesting. Now, I would conclude that Jesus was probably dressed like a, what do you think? Rabbi. Yeah. By the way, the disciples are not with him, apparently. We don't know. Greek would not necessarily tell us if it wasn't pertinent, but it appears that Jesus went alone, and that's what a lot of commentators, a lot of readers, scholars have concluded. Although, remember, in the Greek, he could have had 100 people there, and they won't tell you, because if they're not pertinent to the logos to telos, the logical argument to the conclusion, you're not going to know, okay? So maybe not, we don't know. But he calls him supreme in authority, which would be if he was dressed like a rabbi, he would probably call him rabbi. For some reason, this guy, Jesus, was it because his clothes were clean? Was it because he was, I don't know, maybe his beard was trimmed? I don't know. Why did he say supreme in authority? He recognized somehow that this guy, maybe the whole thing about Jesus had gone around enough, right? That we'll maybe see that in a little bit. It says, I hold not a man in order that whenever the water has been stirred, he might throw me into the swimming or diving place. But another comes down, descends before me when I am going. And I want to point out the use of ego. We rarely see the I form in Greek. And remember, I told you this is probably written for Latin readers or hearers. And so they're more used to seeing an I and the first person form, singular form like this. So that's interesting. Now, whenever we see this from Jesus' lips, ego eimi especially, that's a big deal. Not as big a deal here, but it is interesting that he uses the ego, the I form. Because the author is obviously, whenever you see the I form, what's the author trying to do? Alert you to something, alert you to the indication, to something about this. And then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. All right, this guy's not walked for 38 years. He's been there for 30 years. I hope they have a way of going to the restroom or something. I don't know, can he drag himself? Yeah, and eating, somebody's got to be, maybe his family is helping. I don't know. This is a tense and difficult situation to begin with. You can tell. Jesus said to him, rise, take up thy bed, and walk. Here's the Greek. And this is really an interesting thing in the account. He didn't tell him. He made a logical argument to him, to Jesus. Egeria, you stand up in the marketplace. What's really important about Egeria is Egeria ek nekros. Egeria ek nekros is resurrection, to rise from the dead. He didn't tell him to rise from the dead. He told him Egeria, you literally Egeria ek nekros means to stand up from death in the marketplace. He just said Egeria, you stand up in the marketplace assembly. You lift up the krabaton, a mattress of you, and peripatei. Now, if you remember from when we studied Hebrews and we studied the other, the Pauline documents, we studied Pauline documents. You remember peripateo? Peripateo? Peripateo means to tread all around. Paul loved to use this word. He used it all the time. It means it means, okay, when you're peripateing, right, you're not going from place to place. You're not going from Cana to Galilee. You're not going from Cana to Capernaum. What are you doing? You're meandering. You're wandering around. You're treading around. That's what Paul tells the Christians to do, the early Christians, to tread all around because of the people you will meet, right? This word is not used a whole lot in John. It's used a little bit, but Jesus made a logical argument. Jesus made a logical argument to him. So he didn't just say, this isn't a quote. He did what? He did an extended talk to him.
I wish we had that.
I know, it'd be really cool, right? What he would say. Somehow he convinced this guy and healed him at the same time. So was his leg like totally withered? That you remember there's one account where Jesus healed the withered guy's arm right there in the temple area, and it's like it made it better, and people were astounded. So maybe that's what happened here, is that his leg or his limb or whatever it was, the problem, just immediately healed. So they have to, if he's been laying there for 38 years, right?
It's going to be atrophied for sure.
Yeah. Everything's going to be atrophied, right? Maybe his arms are like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Because he walks on his hands. I don't know. But his leg or legs are going to be atrophied. They're not going to be able to move. So somehow Jesus made a logical argument to him. You stand up in the marketplace, the assembly. You lift up your mattress and you tread all around. So what did he tell him to do?
Show people.
Yeah, walk around and show people. Remember, the King James said it was near the sheep market. Where else was Jesus at the sheep market in the temple? Remember when he kicked him out, right? So maybe they banned him from the temple a little bit here. It's like, don't let that guy in. He's dangerous, But Jesus told this guy, and it's Sabbath. We're going to get to the Sabbath part in a second, if you read ahead, right? But Jesus told him, he didn't just tell him, oh, go home. Jesus said to him, rise up, take thy bed, and walk. Oh, that's not exactly what he said. He says, stand up in the marketplace. And he used that word, egeria. We know, right? We know of all the different words he could have used, right? But instead he used that word. He used egeria, which is usually used in the Gospels for egeria ek nekros, to the resurrection, raise up from the dead. So he used a very specific word. Remember, these documents cost like $20,000 to $50,000 to produce. So you're going to use the exact word you mean, right? In our English, it's stand up. But it means stand up in the marketplace, specific word. So he wants him to stand up in the marketplace, the assembly. You lift up your mattress and you tread all around. Tread all around where?
Sheep's Market.
The marketplace.
The marketplace. Because Jesus knows exactly what's going to happen. Right? Can you guess this? At once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, chongo, as we used to say in the banana splits, right? And immediately the man was made whole, took up his bed and walked on. The same day was the Sabbath, Shabbat. And Euthos, directly he became healthy, the anthropos, the man, and he lifted up the grabaton, the mattress of him, and peripatei, he began to walk around. It was but Shabbaton, the Sabbath, 7 days of the week in Ekina, that one thing, to the period, to the day. And directly the man became healthy, and he lifted up his mattress and began to walk around. But in that day it was Sabbath. Okay, he just put a big target on himself, right? Now this is really interesting because, Jesus did not break the law. Now he told somebody to break the law. That's interesting.
Was it against the law to walk on the Sabbath or to carry something on
To
the Sabbath?
carry something on the Shabbat. But it's really interesting that Jesus told him, right? And I think I do want to put this in as a plug because, Jesus was really concerned about people. I mean, he really is. He's so concerned about people. He has a beautiful exchange with the, woman of Samaria. He has a not as great as exchange with the regal guy, but that's okay. The regal guy, the kid was helped, saved, everything's cool. And now he's helping this guy. But remember the woman at the well? I think she got back her pot. Jesus was probably looking after her pot. But we see all the time, you notice all the parables about the talents and the parables about, responsibility for things. Jesus was concerned about the guy. But what was the only probably possession he had other than his clothing? The mattress.
So
Right?
don't leave it behind, dude. You might lose it.
Well, I think it's interesting because we would go, we're like, well, it's 38-year-old Matt, maybe. Yes, sir.
Well, it occurs to me too that if people see this guy walking around, they might not immediately recognize who he is. But if he's carrying that mat around, it's like, oh, that's that guy that was paralyzed for 30 years.
Absolutely.
Bingo.
Might smell.
Bingo. Well, okay. Jesus is God, and God is really smart. And this, he didn't tell him to go home. He didn't tell him to go get lunch. He told him, pick up your mat on the Shabbat and go around, right? And so, just some guy walking around in the marketplace, that doesn't mean anything. But somebody carrying a mattress on Shabbat, and if this is really Purim, right? Oh man, oh man, oh man. And that's what's going to happen. We're going to see him directly. He began healthy, lifted the mattress, began to walk around, but that day it was Sabbath. And then what happened? What happened next? And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, the Jewish leaders said to the man, why do you think the Jewish leaders are around?
It's
Because they're
Purim.
shadowing Jesus, looking for some reason to find a charge against him.
I think that maybe that's a really good observation. I think that's a good one. But whether it is or not, they're at the temple during a festival. Yeah, during a festival at the temple. So who's there?
Lots of people are.
Everybody. Remember, I told you, we know that Jerusalem was about 20,000 folks in this period when there was no festival. When there was a festival, it swelled to 1 million people, we believe, in the ancient period, in the ancient era. Because everyone, all the Jews that were within distance of going, every male had to go there, right, during the 3 pilgrim festivals. And they brought their families, their livestock, everything. Because would you leave? Okay, if all the guys are leaving Nazareth, would you leave your wife and kids? This is a might make right society. Okay, there's no police. The legion's there. They might, back to the hand, right? The legions are there not to protect the people per se. They do some work like that, but their job is to protect the nation state, right? Protect the trade routes. They don't care if you got a problem, okay? Yeah, write a letter to the legate, okay? Cry me a river, write a letter. And people can't write. And how much does it cost to write a letter? Oh, that's just $10,000 right there. Okay, yeah, that's going to work. The big deal is that this is a huge deal. All of the leaders are there. It's a festival, whichever festival it is. If it's Purim, it's not a required festival. So there's fewer people there. And I kind of like this idea about being Purim, because if it's Purim, then it's about it's about different things. It's about it's about the people being rescued from Babylon, right? It's about that whole thing where Esther is the heroine, right, that helps release the people from their captivity. Oh, wait. Did we have somebody just released from captivity? Yeah. What a beautiful parallel. So, it could be Passover. That's released from captivity too. Booth's Tabernacles, not so much. But Purim, boy, that kind of fits. There's less people, but more of the, more who?
Leaders.
Yeah, less people, but the leaders are all there. I mean, they wouldn't miss this, right? Hey, the rabbi's being carried by his students. Come on, take me down to Jerusalem. I got to go to Purim, right? Just saying. So the leaders are all there, but maybe not all the people. So I kind of like this. It's kind of cool. So the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is Shabbat. The law forbids you to carry your mat." It is. It does. It does forbid. We read the Torah. We studied the Torah. The Jews therefore said to him that was cured, "It is the Shabbat day. It is not lawful for thee to carry thy mat." And here's what it says in the Greek. Elegon. They were making a logical argument. So did they just tell him? No, they were doing Shamanzitik. They were, the German, that's shame on you. They were castigating him. They were like nuns with a ruler. They're like, you are being bad. They're going over and over again, right? They're telling them the law. They're reading the law. They're got it memorized. They were making a logical argument. Certainly, accordingly, the Judeans to the tetrapneto, he having been served or restored to health. Really interesting word in Greek. A 7th day of the week, Sabbath, the Sabbath, etc. It is, and it is not allowed to you to lift up the mattress, your mattress. But they're giving him an extended harangue. According to the Judeans, we're making a logical argument, him having been restored to health. It is Sabbath, and it is not allowed for you to lift up your mattress. Okay, here's a guy, 38 years, and okay. You saw how close everything was together. I probably should bring the map up again, right? But you have the Bethsaida, the pools, right? The sheep pools, they actually call it. And then you have the sheep gate, and presumably the sheep market, right? It doesn't say that specifically, but presumably, and the pool of Israel, and it's the north part going into the temple. And it already told you there was a mikvah there. So what are the people doing? They are in the mikvah. There's lots of people around. Even if it's Purim, there's still a lot of people around. There's a lot going on. Jesus tells him, Egerio, peripato, and he does. And the Jewish leaders call him on it. It's not lawful for you to carry anything. According to the Judeans, we're making a logical argument to him having restored health. It is Shabbat. It's not allowed for you to lift up your mattress. But he replied, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. That's NIV. He answered him, he made me whole. The same said unto me, take up thy bed and walk. Hos, which one who, but at Corinthe. He concluded for himself to them. We'll talk about this. This is really fun. The poises, he having made or done me healthy, that one thing, to me he said, Epen, he said, you lift up the kravaton of you and tread all around. But who concluded for himself to them? So what's really cool about this, apokryphe, man, that is the word. That means he contemplated. Why did he contemplate?
Gotta be careful what you're saying to these guys.
Yeah, because, number one, they're blaming him for breaking the Shabbat, right? And what did they do in Exodus or Leviticus to the guy that broke the Shabbat? And
Stone, don't you?
they killed him. Yeah, they stoned him to death. And he was picking up pieces of wood. This guy didn't have a piece of wood. He has his mattress. Okay? So if
He
you say the
understands his Miranda rights.
yeah, read him his Miranda
He
rights.
wasn't gonna say anything that was gonna be used against him.
That's right. Well, if he said, you got to lay the blame someplace else, right? Because if you don't lay the blame someplace else, you're done, right? And by the way, remember, he called him supreme in authority. We know Jesus called a rabbi. Nicodemus called him a rabbi. So there's stuff in accreditation. We don't know who it was. They don't know who it was yet, right? But who concluded for himself to them, having made me healthy, said that to me, you lift up your mattress and tread all around. And by the way, the word he used was Aaron. Remember I told you? We have lots of words we can use, right? There are lots of words we can use. Jesus said, Aria, or Egerio, stand up, right, in the marketplace and walk around. He doesn't say that exactly. He said that to me. You lift up your mattress and tread around. And I have to point out in English, now, Greek isn't the same as English, so the subjunctive to, that. Whenever you say that in English, it's like, you can say he said, but if you say he said that, then in English, the subjunctive to doesn't have to be in quotes because it's presumed to be, subjunctive to is presumed to be not a quotation per se. So in English, we would say that he obviously did not quote Jesus because we saw Jesus, the conclusion or the telos of his argument was a little bit broader, right, to the guy. But yet, kind of interesting. It's very interesting. He chose his words carefully, okay? And like I said, the focus should be on the word peripatei. This word is used specifically and more than once. It doesn't mean to walk in a common translation. It means to walk around. Jesus wanted the guy to walk around on Shabbat with his mattress. The purpose was to gain the attention of the people, and especially the leaders. Okay, obviously. So they asked him, who was this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk? And we ran out of time, but we will get to the conclusion of this historical account, which is so really cool, right? Oh boy, what's, the cliffhanger. Can you imagine all the people being read this, right, in the synagogue or the churches, right, in the early period, and they're what? Hanging on. What's going to happen, And I bet you, we miss all the good stuff because I bet you they're reading it with like elocution, right? Their voices are getting lower. They're getting higher. They're yelling when they need to. They might even add in some stuff, they're not supposed to, but yeah, Jesus gave a logical argument and did what Tammy wants, right? Here's what he said, right? I mean, they did that in the ancient world. We wouldn't get away with that. But anyway, it's really fun. Thank you, Lord, for this day. I pray you look at us this week, and here we pray.
Merry Christmas, everyone, and we'll see you on the New Year's Day.
January 1st.
We have to wait 2 weeks